bring you this important program tonight. And I would like to recognize Elm Street Books and Susan Ryan, a co-founder. The New Canaan Garden Club and Lauren Bromberg and Anna Hutchins, co-presidents. The New Canaan Land Trust and Aaron Leflin, executive director. And the New Canaan Library and Lisa Oldham, executive director. Thank you to you, your staff, and the volunteers for once again proving that the power of partnership and community. Please note that there are fire exits at both the front and the rear of the auditorium, and that there also will be books for sale following the program. We look forward to as many of your questions as possible at the end of the program, and there will be volunteers with microphones to be moving throughout the auditorium for your convenience. And now, on for the main act. I am honored and humbled to introduce our speaker, renowned American environmentalist and author Bill McKibben. Mr. McKibben is the founder of the grassroots climate campaign 350.org and was among the first to have warned of the dangers of global warming. He is the author of 15 books, including bestsellers The End of Nature, Earth, and Deep Economy, and his most recent, Falter, Has the Human Race Begun to Play Itself Out? Mr. McKibben is the Schumann Distinguished Professor in Residence at Middlebury College and the winner of the Gandhi Peace Prize, the Thomas Merton Prize, and the Right Livelihood Prize, sometimes called the Alternate Nobel. He lives in Vermont. Please help me welcome Mr. McKibben to us tonight.
Well, Carolyn, thank you very much for that introduction. It is a great pleasure for me to be here, and at the behest of such a excellent quartet of operations. The bookstore and the library are obviously friends of any writer. In fact, one of the great things about being a writer is that it's always been one of the few things in the world where you produced a commodity that everybody in the world had access to for free if they wanted to. That a library, I don't know why it was that we chose books to be the one thing that we could bring ourselves to share with each other, but it's a good thing. And in the strange economy of writing, just enough people buy books too anyway to sort of keep writers in business and going, so it all works. The Land Trust obviously is a passion of mine. I've been on the Adirondack Land Trust for many years, and I'm very grateful for that work. And the Garden Club, I got to tell you, despite the sort of reputation of garden clubs, I've found them to be among the fiercest advocates for when it's Garden Club Lobby Day in Washington, D.C. Watch out. You do not want to be a senator on the wrong side of the Garden Club, is what I would say. Now, it is a great pleasure to be here and in this beautiful school and all of that. Probably more my pleasure than yours, because my job in the world is basically just to bum people out, you know? And I will do it for a little while, and then I'll try to be a little more hopeful. But I find no point in dancing around or minimizing the problem that we face unless we understand the scale and the pace of the crisis that we're in. We will not understand the scale and the pace of the solutions that are required to deal with it. So let's just talk about it. Maybe to help, I'll show a couple of pictures from a trip I took, organized last year up to Greenland. which, as you all know, is a beautiful, beautiful place, the largest storehouse of ice in our hemisphere. The ice sheet's a mile thick in many places. When it all melts, it would add 23 feet of sea level just from Greenland before you got to the Antarctic or anything else, and it is melting. I don't know whether you can make out that picture or not. That was the front of you can see through the front window of the boat that I'd sort of organized this expedition on. You can see that there's open water everywhere as far as you can see, but I was standing behind the captain in the wheelhouse and looking up at his electronic chart and noting that the cursor that demarks the boat is about a mile into solid land. And I pointed this out with mild trepidation to the captain, and he just laughed and said, "Oh, the chart's 5 years old. Back then, everything as far as you could see was frozen." I was there because I'd wanted to take the woman on the left in the grass skirt, Kathy Jetnil Kajiner, up there onto the ice sheet. She's a poet, and a wonderful poet, and she comes from the Marshall Islands in the South Pacific. Magnificent place, hard used by the 20th century. We blew up a large section of it with the H-bomb test at Bikini Atoll. But harder used by the 21st century. The highest point in the Marshalls is about a meter above sea level. People have been there for thousands of years, but they're probably not going to be there for many more decades. So I wanted Kathy up to deliver this poem standing on the ice that when it melted would drown her home. And she recruited that other woman in black, Aka Niviana, who's a Greenlandic native whose homeland is disappearing in front of her eyes, and together they produced a really wonderful poem that I urge you to go listen to. It's on YouTube, and it's had millions of views now, and it's a poem with an understandable dose of rage in it, but also a certain kind of generosity that comes with the understanding that we're all going to be in this boat eventually. And in fact, you know, more and more of us are in this boat already. Let me show you this little video that I took with my cell phone as we were leaving the place where we changed the batteries on one of these instruments that records the recession of the glaciers. You won't get to the good part for a moment, so I'll just talk as we fly along. Climate change is by far the biggest thing that human beings have ever done. Far, far, far and away the largest thing we've ever done. So far, we've raised the temperature of the planet about 1 degree Celsius, which may not sound like much, but the extra heat that we trap with the carbon that we've put in the atmosphere, mostly by burning coal and gas and oil, is the heat equivalent every day now of 400,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs. That's enough heat that we've melted way more than half of the sea ice in the Arctic, this continent-sized, millennia-old, meters-thick formation of ice that's now mostly gone. We've changed everything. The ocean, you're looking at a little corner of it, is 30% more acidic than it was 40 years ago because it's absorbing heat from, absorbing carbon from the atmosphere. Pretty much every day now we can point to some unprecedented emergency around the world. Actually, I'll stop talking for a moment and just show you that ice is 12 stories, about 120 feet high, and this section just happened to let loose as we were going over. So those waves are 60, 70, 80 feet high, and the pilot was understandably a little eager to leave, but I urged him to circle once just because, well, there's a deep and sinister beauty to what's happening there, but it also just, for me, was a very visceral reminder now of what's happening every second, of every minute, of every hour, of every day, someplace around the world. And every time it happens, the ocean rises some tiny fraction of a millimeter, and the world changes that much more. Everything changing. I was just back and forth this afternoon with our crew at 350 in Australia. Yesterday, was the first day in recorded history when not a drop of rain fell anywhere on that vast continent, not one drop anywhere. Today, they're having the wildfire warnings for today. They invented a new level to mark just how dry and how hot it was. They're described as catastrophic fire conditions. The fires that are already burning have produced enough smoke that people can see them in New Zealand. This obviously comes days after we shut down power to millions of Californians in a desperate and not entirely successful effort to keep from yet again burning down large parts of the state that just a decade or two ago still marked in our minds the kind of ideal of relaxation and ease and the Chronicle, the San Francisco Chronicle, in its coverage of the fires last week, just in passing, said, just in the main story, news story, said, experts are beginning to wonder if large sections of this state are no longer habitable by humans safely. If that's California, imagine the rest of the world. The iron law of climate change is the less you did to cause it, the sooner and the harder you suffer. Maybe you saw some of the picture, those graphs in the Times last week. There was a new study that came out. The Times did a good job of covering. And what it did was recalibrate the number of people at risk from sea level rise over the next couple of decades. Not by increasing the rate at which the glaciers are melting, that scientists have been noting that for a long time, but by going back and recalibrating what had been our erroneous sense of how high off to relative to sea level large sections of the world were. It turned out that the satellite mapping had gotten it wrong and raised it 6 or 7 feet many places. When they recalibrated overnight, 300 million more people were now at risk, well, really more than at risk, kind of scheduled to go underwater in the next few decades. And it included regions like all of the Mekong Delta in Vietnam, where farmers are already having to leave because of saltwater intrusion in their fields, but this is the biggest rice-growing region on the planet. One doesn't know what will happen if we let this keep going on. So far, we've raised the temperature of the planet 1 degree Celsius, 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit. We're on a track, even if we kept all the promises that every country had made in Paris, to raise the temperature of the planet 3 degrees Celsius or a little more, 5-6 degrees Fahrenheit, before the youngest people in this room are my age. And if we do that, if the temperature goes up 3 degrees Celsius, we simply are not going to have civilizations like the ones we have now. That's too much damage, too much stress. We're already stressing things immensely. We've seen the highest recorded temperatures ever reliably recorded on planet Earth in the last couple of years, and they've come in big cities across the Asian subcontinent and the Middle East. The temperature's gotten several times now to 129 degrees. In the Persian Gulf, in that heat wave, it was so humid that the dew point, the heat index, the feels-like temperature was about 160 degrees. People can survive at 129 degrees for a few hours. After that, your body is unable to cool off fast enough to cope. Well, if the temperature goes up 3 degrees Celsius, the computer modeling makes it very clear that a vast swath of the planet, much of the Asian subcontinent, much of the North China Plain, much of the Middle East, will see those temperatures for weeks on end every year. And of course, people will have to leave because you can't keep living there. You can't farm there. You can't go outside and work. The UN estimates that we could see 1 billion climate refugees this century. So think about that for a minute. 1 million people came out of Syria to Western Europe, refugees from the Civil War that in part was sparked by the deepest drought in the history of what we used to call the Fertile Crescent. Those 1 million people were enough to discombobulate the politics of the entire European continent. 1 million people or so have shown up on our southern border, many of them, as the Times reported a couple of weeks ago, forced to leave by the deep drought across Honduras and Guatemala that had made farming impossible for many people. As you know, that surge of refugees has been enough to discombobulate our politics in deep and ugly and depressing ways. So multiply that by 1,000, not 1 million refugees, but 1 billion, and then try to imagine what kind of world we're going to have. So the most important thing that we have to do in our lifetimes, and really perhaps that humans have ever had to do, is in the next few years make the changes necessary, not to stop global warming, it is too late for that, but to keep it from going entirely out of control, to try and limit it as close to 2 degrees Celsius as it's possible to do still at this point. That's the task for our lifetimes. Now, well, let me pause for a minute. We're through the really terrible stuff for a while, and take a breath, and I'll take a breath. And I'll tell you some good news for a minute, which is that we know, in a way we didn't know a decade or 2 decades ago, what it is we're going to do, could do, to change the situation. The engineers on this planet have done their job about as well as the politicians have done theirs badly. And the price of a solar panel, the price of a wind turbine, have dropped about 90% in the last decade. So this is now the cheapest way to generate power across most of the world. That's very, very good news. It means that if we wanted to go to work, we could go to work fast and hard in the same way that we went to work in the years after Pearl Harbor, with a will and a vengeance to reorient our economy for a while to the absolutely essential task of getting this job done. So if we have deep crisis, and if we have at least some solutions, and there's a lot of others we can talk about, that's just the single biggest intervention we need to make. If we have a big crisis and we have a big solution, the interesting question is why we're not going all out to apply it. What is it that's keeping us from making the kind of change that we could be making and should be making? And I got to say, this is the part that took me too long to figure out. And it may be the part that, in a way, you don't want to hear about, but it needs saying. I wrote the first book about climate change. It came out 30 years ago this month. First book for a non-scientific audience, The End of Nature. And I think my thought at the time, I was 27, was, we should write more books and have more symposiums and speeches and journal articles and things, because we're in an argument and we need to pile up as much evidence as we humanly can. And at a certain point, the weight of that evidence will be so great that our leaders will do what obviously they need to do. And it took me a long time to figure out that that was wrong. We'd won the argument within a few years. The scientific community was in complete, robust consensus about what was happening by about 1995 or so. We'd won the argument. We were just losing the fight, because the fight wasn't about data and reason and evidence. The fight was what fights are always about, money and power. And the other side in this fight, the fossil fuel industry, had money and power to burn, literally to burn. And they waged an incredibly effective war to maintain their business model, even at the cost of breaking the planet. Now, that's strong language, and I try not to exaggerate, and I wouldn't have said it that way even a few years ago. But over the last few years, we've seen really remarkable investigative reporting that's demonstrated beyond any doubt from the LA Times, from the Columbia Journalism School where I was this afternoon, from a bunch of places, that the fossil fuel industry knew all there was to know about climate change back in the 1980s. It makes sense. I mean, Exxon was then the biggest company on Earth. It had a great staff of scientists, and its product was carbon. So of course they were going to find out what was going on, and they did find out. One of the documents that people dug up was an incredibly savvy prediction of precisely what the temperature and the CO2 concentration would be in 2019, and they were absolutely spot on, could not have been closer. Not only that, the executives at places like Exxon believed them. Exxon started building every drilling rig they built to compensate for the rise in sea level that they knew was coming. What they didn't do was tell any of the rest of us. Instead, they invested billions of dollars in building the architecture of deceit and denial and disinformation that kept us locked for 30 years in a completely phony debate about whether or not global warming was real. A debate that both sides knew the answer to at the beginning. It's just that one of them was willing to lie. And it was the most consequential lie in human history because it cost us the 3 decades that we desperately needed and can now never get back. It's hard to, it's hard to kind of take that on board, to kind of really think it through and feel it. But it shouldn't come as an enormous surprise. A lot of the people that they hired in the oil industry to do that work had come straight from the tobacco industry, where they'd done precisely the same work for the 20 years before that about cigarettes. And you can tell the kind of depth of the change by looking, 30 years ago, the Republican President of the United States, George H.W. Bush, presented with the facts about climate change, reacted completely appropriately, as any normal human being would. He said, this is clearly a problem. He said, we're going to solve the greenhouse effect with the White House effect. That's a good line. Fast forward 30 years of, Koch brothers pouring money into buying the Republican Party and endless disinformation spreading all the time. And the current Republican President of the United States continually insists that climate change is a hoax manufactured by the Chinese. A position delusional enough that if you were sitting on the Metro North and the guy next to you was muttering that under his breath, you would get up and change seats, But that's where we are. That's what happens if you have unlimited resources to spread a lie. So, what do? Once I'd sort of begun to figure this out for myself, the question became how to respond. Clearly not by trying to outspend Exxon. That's not, a smart strategy. I'm not a theologian. I've never risen higher in the ecclesial hierarchy than Methodist Sunday school teacher, but it's my firm belief that the oil companies have more money than God, so it's not, outspending them was not a good option. Instead, we had to start looking for the other currency that sometimes comes into play, the kind of currency of movements, creativity and spirit and passion, and sometimes the willingness to spend one's body and go to jail. And history indicates that sometimes this has been enough to build movements that can challenge entrenched power. So that's what we set out to do. It's been about a 10-year story now, and it crested 2 months ago in late September with the glorious day around the world when 7 million people were out in the streets. That was a beautiful thing to see. Let me show you the kind of beginnings of that from 10 years ago, just so you can get a sense, really, of who your brothers and sisters in this work are. We started this thing called 350.org at Middlebury College in Vermont, where I teach. We had no idea what we were doing. We took our name from what the scientists said was the most important number in the world, 350 parts per million CO2, the most you could safely have in the atmosphere, a number we're already way north of. We're about 412 parts per million now and going up about 2.5 or 3 parts per million per year. That's why Australia burns down. It's why Greenland melts. But we chose the number partly because it was important, mostly because we wanted to work around the world, and we figured that Arabic numerals would cross linguistic boundaries more easily than English phrases, you know. And so we set out. Now, we had no money, and as I said, no real clue. There were 7 undergraduates working with me. There are 7 continents. Each one took one. The guy who took the Antarctic also had to take the internet, okay? And our job was to find other people like ourselves. We scheduled the first day of action for just about exactly 10 years ago in the fall of 2009. And we asked people anywhere they were just to do something. We didn't know how it would go out, didn't know how well it would do. People had never tried. Just the internet was just reaching the stage where this kind of idea of a day of distributed action was even possible to contemplate. We got the first sense it might work about 3 days early. We told everybody to do this on a Saturday, but on Thursday we were sitting around our little one-room office, and the phone rang, and it was our leader in Ethiopia. Like all of us, a volunteer, like most of us, a she, like a surprising number of us, 17 years old. There've been long before the wonderful Greta Thunberg, there have been lots of young people who've been providing leadership, and it's been wonderful to see all along. Anyway, this girl was in tears. She said, the government's taken away our permit for Saturday, so we're doing this today before they can stop us, which was brave. It's not a very nice government always, but that wasn't why she was crying. She kept saying, we wanted to do this the same day as everybody else. We want to be part of the whole world taking this on. We're really sorry. We hope we're not spoiling it for people. We really apologize. And we have 15,000 young people out in the street in Addis Ababa right now chanting 350. So we were like, thank you, Lord. Don't worry about the date. You know, you did good. In fact, there's a story to that picture that's kind of emblematic of the divide around the world. As soon as she told us that, we knew we needed the picture so we could send it out to, around the world to get reporters interested in this and understanding what was going on. She said, we got a good picture, but, the internet's terrible here. There's no internet. We will never be, could be day, 2 before we can send it to you. And I'd been to Addis, so I knew that there was one Western hotel in Addis, the Intercontinental. Said, go to the lobby of the Intercontinental. They'll have. She said, okay. She went off to do it, and she got a call. She called back about an hour later. Said, well, she said, I'm black. They won't let me in. I swallowed hard and said, look around for some white lady, because there's a lot of people there adopting children, and find one and hand them your phone and send them in. And that's how that picture came to, go out. And within an hour, it was all over the world. We had it out in newspapers and things everywhere. But that should stick in one's mind as a kind of reminder of how one of the best things about, as people uploaded pictures for the next 2 days, there were 5,200 demonstrations in 181 countries. CNN described it as the most widespread day of political activity on the planet's history. One of the best things for me was that I'd always been told that environmentalism was something that rich white people did, and that if you didn't know where your next meal was coming from, you wouldn't be an environmentalist, and no. It took about half an hour of watching these pictures flood in, sometimes 20 a minute, to understand that almost everybody we were working with around the world was poor and black and brown and indigenous and Asian and young, because that's what almost everybody on Earth is. Okay, and oddly enough, they're exactly as interested as anybody in this room about the future, maybe more so, because the future bears down hard on you in a lot of places, And so it was beautiful to see, and people brought their A game. There was a lot of wit that was expressed in all of this. Big involvement of religious communities for the first time. There's the head of Muslim South Africa, of indigenous tradition behind them, the Anglican Archbishop who replaced Desmond Tutu at the head of a big multi-faith march. I'd been to the Mideast to do some organizing. We convened a meeting in Bethlehem. Everybody was eager to go to work because the Dead Sea is shrinking very rapidly as temperatures rise, but there's too many military checkpoints in the way to make it easy to cross. So the Jordanians said, we'll make the big 3 on our beach. The Palestinians said, we'll make the 5 in Palestine. The Israelis did their part on the beach at Tel Aviv. It was beautiful, and it got a lot of press because it was good to see people putting aside what they normally fight about in order to concentrate on the deepest issues. China, we had 200 demonstrations that day. China is not an easy place to do this. A few of them were broken up by the police and people arrested. China's doing some interesting things now. China's installing renewable energy faster than we've ever seen it installed on the planet. It's pretty remarkable to see what's happening. There's the Student Government Association of the Maldives. They're holding their meeting in the lagoon to underline the existential problem you face on a low-lying island in a fast-warming planet. I mean, these are from Yemen. That's maybe the toughest place in the whole world. All the women making that zero are in full black burqa, okay? So to us, it doesn't look like a meeting of the Garden Club, but it in many ways is the same. People's hearts are in the same place, not thinking about themselves, thinking about the future, thinking about the next generation, trying to make it work. There were 300 or 400 pictures that ended up in a file marked 350 adorable, and they were adorable. And they were also hard to look at. I mean, look at that girl in the middle. Look at her eyes. And then realize she's going to be a refugee in her lifetime. And not from something she did, from stuff we did, So we've gone on, we've held, we think, about 20,000 rallies in every country on earth except North Korea over the years. And we love it. It's amazingly fun, sort of amazingly fun work, sometimes in places that are obvious and familiar, sometimes in places I'd never heard of before, sometimes in places that we've all heard of but for very much other reasons, and it's beautiful work, and sometimes literally beautiful. We've done these massive art project days when we've so many people out making images that we've had to borrow satellites to take the picture. There's Tom York from Radiohead assembled 3,000 or 4,000 of his closest friends on the beach in Brighton and gave them all blue raincoats to form that image. Those of you with a good classical education, the image of King Canute trying to hold back the rising seas, okay? There's an image with thousands of people forming it in the DR, an image that's all too familiar in our world now, somebody having to flee through the roof of their house as the basement floods, that Beatles pushing solar panels across the Egyptian desert. This might have been my favorite. It's one of these dry riverbeds in the Southwest. And when the satellite came over, 3,000 or 4,000 people that organized by the Santa Fe Art Institute just put blue blankets up overhead to bring the river back to life for a minute. And it was almost made you weep to look at it. Now, if we had 50 or 75 years to deal with this problem, this is just the kind of education we would keep doing. Because humans, change best if they change slowly and generationally. That's the cheapest, least traumatic, best way to make change. And 75, 50 years, we'd have enough time to do that kind of work. But we don't have 50 or 75 years. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said last year at this time that if we hadn't made fundamental transformations in the energy system by 2030, and they defined that as cutting the flow of carbon to the atmosphere by about half by 2030, then we had no chance of meeting the targets that we had set in Paris just a couple of years ago. So if we're going to make that kind of change, we're not going to do it one Prius at a time, one vegan dinner at a time, okay? It's important to do those things. My house is covered with solar panels. I'm glad they're there. I'm proud of them. But I don't try to fool myself that that's how we're going to solve this. If we're going to do it, it's going to be, well, it's going to be individuals deciding to be a little less individual and joining together with others in movements large enough to make some kind of difference, change the basic economic and political ground rules enough that we can make some progress. And that's going to be, by definition, uncomfortable work because it's asking us to change faster than we really want to, than it is easy to do. These are pictures from 8 years ago at the start of the fight over the Keystone Pipeline in Washington, D.C. Some of you may remember this because it became the kind of emblematic environmental battle of this decade in a lot of ways. When it began, we thought we had no chance, but we also thought we had no choice. Jim Hansen, the great NASA climate scientist, had declared that if we drained the tar sands in Alberta of the economically recoverable oil, that one deposit of oil had enough carbon to take us from 415 parts per million now to 540 parts per million. Just that, forget Saudi Arabia, forget every other deposit of oil, coal, or gas in the world, just that one place. So this pipeline was like a 1,500-mile fuse to a giant carbon bomb, you know. We didn't think we had a chance. No one did, because big oil never lost a fight like this. The National Journal, which is kind of the trade paper on Capitol Hill, polled its 300 energy insiders in August of 2011, and 93% of them said TransCanada would have its permit for the pipeline by the end of the year. And it was probably a good bet because no one had ever blocked that kind of pipeline. But then 1,200 and some people went to jail, including a few people in this room. And it was the biggest day of, biggest session of civil disobedience about anything in this country in a very long time. And by the time it was done, this was on the radar in a serious way, you know. And then we had 50,000 people surround the White House, and the next year 100,000 people, and on and on and on for 3 or 4 years until finally Barack Obama said, okay, we won't build it, which is a big victory. It was the first time that oil industry had lost a fight like that. Now, of course, they persevered, and Donald Trump, on his first day in office, the first thing he did was, the very first action he took was to sign a permit for the Keystone Pipeline. And Donald Trump is apparently completely convinced that it's therefore been built because he keeps talking about it in speeches as one of, but in fact, it hasn't been built, and people are still in the way and still fighting it. And TransCanada announced another delay this year, and we don't know if we can hold out. It'll probably depend on what happens in the next election. But at any rate, for 8 years, we've kept 800,000 barrels a day of the dirtiest oil on earth underground. More to the point, it sparked, everybody saw that it was possible to stand up to these guys. And once they'd seen that, there was no unseeing it. Every coal mine in the world, every pipeline, every LNG port, they all get fought, and fought hard. Some of the time we win, some of the time we lose. Even when we lose, we delay these guys for months or years, and that's good, because every month that passes, the engineers back in the lab are dropping the price of a solar panel another % or 2, and the spreadsheet gets harder and harder. And now, have we done this in time? I don't know. I mean, we'll find out. These are pictures from, we did a day of action where people just around the world rallied in places that were already feeling the effects of climate change, and some of them were horrible. I mean, that's the part of Kenya where, in no small part because of drought, Boko Haram has become such a horrible and difficult force. That's near the town where all those young women were kidnapped out of school a couple of years ago. Sometimes the results are less dire, but, you know, simply the lack of the change of seasons is hard for those of us who grew up in a world where our psychological clock was modulated by the turns in the Earth's atmosphere. This is everywhere on the planet. I mean, this is parts of, so we see big forest fires now in Siberia that are 4 or 5 degrees of latitude north of where we've ever seen fires before, because it's now hot enough to dry out that land and let it burn. These are people in Micronesia who are leaving their homes already because every time there's a high tide now, it just washes through the living room. That top red balloon is where the Dead Sea was 40 years ago. If your problem's not too little rain, your problem's too much. Warm air holds more water vapor than cold. This is the essential fact, maybe, of the 21st century. It's why you get more evaporation and more drought. But once that water's up there, it comes down. And when it comes down in deluge and flood. In 2010 in Pakistan, they had the biggest flood since Noah. The Indus, it rained so hard that the Indus River swelled to the point where it covered about 25% of the country. 20 million people had to leave their homes. That's pretty much everybody from Boston to Baltimore having to evacuate their houses, okay? And if you look at them, it is transparently clear that these people did not cause the crisis that's taking apart their lives, okay? Show you that picture for 1 second. It's one of the smallest demonstrations ever in history. Just some muddy storm turned a street into a river in Haiti. But I show it to you for 2 reasons. One, the year after it was taken, that city, Lake, it's in the southwest peninsula of Haiti. They had the toughest hurricane they've ever had in that part of the world, the strongest winds. It took down 80% of the houses in that city. I have no idea if those kids are alive. We've tried hard to find out, and we don't know. So that's one reason. The other reason is just to look at the signs that your actions affect me. Completely true. Hurricanes draw their power from the heat in the first few meters of the sea surface, It gets hot enough, then you can get big, strong storms. Your actions affect me, but not vice versa. There's nothing you can do in Haiti to change the outcome. You can't burn less fossil fuel. You're not burning any now. You can't come to the White House and protest. We don't let Haitians into the country, certainly not for anything like that. You can't divest your holdings in coal and gas and oil companies. I guarantee you that any 2 rows in the audience here tonight have more more stock in their portfolio than that entire province of Haiti. Okay? That's one of the reasons we launched this big divestment campaign the year after we launched the Keystone thing. In 2012, we asked institutions to start selling their holdings in coal and gas and oil in an effort to begin to kind of take away the social license of those companies, to put some pressure on them. It's gone far better than we anticipated. We're at the point now where, as of last month, about $11.5 trillion in endowments and portfolios had divested from fossil fuel. And they, began small with a few colleges and small colleges and a few religious denominations and things. But now it's grown to the point where it's, City of New York divesting its $200 billion pension fund because, as they pointed out, the City of New York's, if the temperature warms 3 degrees, the City of New York's going to be underwater. So why on earth would they be trying to, investing in the companies that are making that happen? The Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, the biggest single pool of investment capital on planet Earth, all of it earned from North Sea oil. But they said, you know what, we're not doing this anymore. We're taking our winnings out of that casino and finding a new one because this is not okay. The Rockefeller charities, that was a big moment when they said they were divesting because that was the first oil fortune on earth. But they said, we've talked to Desmond Tutu, the Anglican Archbishop, and he's told us that climate change is the new apartheid. And we cannot stay invested in this. And we don't think it's prudent in any event. If John D. Rockefeller, they said, was alive today, he'd be investing in renewable energy, not oil, because it's clearly the future. Last week, the University of California system, the biggest higher education system in the world, decided to divest its $80 billion pension and endowment fund entirely from fossil fuels. Partly, they said, because students had been protesting for many years, thank heaven for them. Partly because, as the head of the endowment said, we can't make money in fossil fuel. It's been the worst performing sector of the economy for a decade now, which is what you would expect from a sector that has a huge technological challenge coming from people who can produce energy cleaner and cheaper than they can, okay? We can't make money anymore, so we're getting out of it. That's good. It would be really good if UConn did the same thing, if the Connecticut Pension Fund did the same thing, on and on and on. And here's the point where I'm going to take this one little step further, and I apologize in advance for doing it, because I know that we're in the part of the world where financial services really is the dominant industry. It's where much of this part of Connecticut makes its living. But let's talk quite frankly and forthrightly. I did a piece in the New Yorker about 8 weeks ago called Money is the Oxygen on Which the Fires of Global Warming Burn. We looked at the insurance companies and at the asset managers and at the banks that continue to be the financial lifeline for this industry. Let's take Chase Bank, which is the biggest. The last 3 years, they've lent $196 billion into the fossil fuel industry. After the Paris Accords, the lending went not down, but up. They've lent money to build pipelines out of the tar sands, to go drill in the Arctic, to do every stupid thing that one could think of. That's not okay anymore in 2019. And in fact, it's particularly, I mean, one can almost understand why Exxon's so resistant, you know? Exxon knows how to do one thing: go drill for oil, sell it to people. But Chase Bank knows how to do, you know, they can lend money to anybody. It's only 5, 6, 7% of their business, you know. In a world that's undergoing an existential crisis, it is not okay to be, so come spring, I think, I'm talking a little out of turn here and a little ahead of myself because we're not completely sure, but I think that by spring there's going to be a big environmental movement-wide attempt to really go after these guys. Don't cut up your Chase card yet. Wait until April so we can do it at the same time, okay? And it's not because it's fun to do this or to, you know, I do not I will tell you that after 30 years I'm tired, and I'm tired of having to do this kind of stuff. And I do not relish taking on the central institutions of global capital, and I don't know whether they can be beaten. Maybe not. They're awfully powerful and strong. But I do know that we better try, and I know we better try because the changes that we're asking, climate change is demanding of other people around the world, are enormous. If you woke up in the Mekong Delta this morning, a rice farmer, you, like every morning, are having to figure out whether this is the season when you're going to have to leave your farm and move to a cardboard box on the edge of the capital city or not, okay? Compared to that, asking Chase to find somebody else to lend their money to is really not a very large request to make. So the good news is that there are lots of people joining this resistance finally, and it's beautiful to watch it happening all over the place. Often it's led by indigenous people, which is really good. Not only did we force indigenous people over and over again off into land that we thought was of no value, but which turns out now to be sitting on top of large heaps of hydrocarbons or astride the pipeline route we need to get it to the ocean. Not only that, there's something extraordinarily powerful about being in a moment when the oldest wisdom traditions on planet Earth And the newest wisdom traditions are adding up, meshing, syncing. The vision from the sweat lodge and the vision from the satellite and the supercomputer are pretty much in sync. And what they're saying is that the vision the rest of us have continued to hold, that we're going to keep growing the size of the economy ever larger forever and things, is the nonsense that we kind of know it is if we stop and think about it for a minute. That's a powerful moment, and I think it's one of the reasons that people are rising up in such numbers. Here are pictures from the big climate march in 2014 in New York and all over the world, and we thought these things were very big at the time, but now we see even bigger ones. The pictures from September around the world were truly astonishing, to see millions of people out in the streets. Millions of people led by young people. The story of Greta Thunberg is remarkable. Just over a year ago, one 15-year-old Swedish schoolgirl decided she wasn't going to go to school anymore. She just sat down on the steps of Parliament in Stockholm with a little handmade sign that said, "On climate strike," and no one said anything to her for a couple of days. Finally, some reporter said, "What are you doing here?" She said, "If the government can't be bothered to prepare the planet for my future, I don't see why they expect me to sit in a room all day and prepare myself for that future. That's illogical, and I won't do it." And that notion spread quickly around the world, and by the spring there were 1 million or 1.5 million school kids on strike. Right about that time, Greta asked a few of us to see if we could get adults engaged in this fight too, and that's led to this big day in September. It's beautiful to watch it happen. Beautiful to see young people standing up, and appropriate because it's they who will spend most of their lives dealing with this trauma. But there's something fundamentally undignified about taking the biggest problem the world has ever faced and assigning it to middle schoolers to solve, you know. That's not okay. And it means the rest of us need to step up in all kinds of ways. The planet is way outside its comfort zone, so we need to be outside ours. What does that mean? It's going to mean different things for different people. I'll just tell you, I was thinking about the story as I was telling it. I was thinking about the beginning of that day, that fight about the Keystone Pipeline. And I'd written the letter in 2011 that asked people to come to Washington and get arrested, which is not an easy kind of letter to write. And in fact, when I wrote it, I said, this is one case where I think young people should not be the cannon fodder. If you're 19, probably an arrest record's not the best thing you could have on your resume. I'm looking out at the demographics in this room. One of the unmixed blessings of growing older is, past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you? You know? So it was with pleasure that I watched people with hairlines like mine descending on Washington. We didn't ask people as they were getting arrested, how old are you? Because that would be a little rude. But we did cleverly, I think, say, who was president when you were born? And the two biggest groups came from the FDR and the Truman administrations. On the last day, there was a guy arrested with a sign around his neck that said, World War II vet, handle with care. He was so old that he'd been born during the Warren Harding administration, which was so long ago, I'd frankly forgotten there was a Warren Harding administration. It was really good for the young people who were there to see their elders acting the way we actually need elders acting in a working civilization. You know, it was good. It was powerful to see. I'm going to show you as I end just a couple of images because they really stick in my mind. These are my favorite colleagues at 350, our colleagues in the South Pacific. They call themselves the Pacific Climate Warriors. They come from those islands, Tuvalu, Vanuatu, the Marshalls, Micronesia, the Solomons, places that are going to disappear. But their slogan is, we're not drowning, we're fighting. And they're fighting hard. While we were doing those big marches, they, a couple of years ago, they were acting on each island. They cut down a tree, and they built a traditional canoe. And they took these traditional war canoes to Newcastle in Australia, which is in their part of the world, and is the biggest coal port in the world. More coal goes through Newcastle on any given day than any other place in the world. And they used them for a day to blockade the biggest ore ships on the planet, okay? It was a beautiful, powerful, symbolic action. Check this out. A month later, the city council of Newcastle, biggest coal port in the world, divested its pension fund from fossil fuel because they could not stand what they were doing to their neighbors in the Pacific, okay? That's why it'd be nice if Connecticut divested its pension fund from fossil fuel. But I show it to you just because I want the image in your head, okay? I'm a writer, so I know that there are certain tropes that live in our imagination and that repeat over and over and over again. And one of them is the kind of battle of the small and the many against the mighty and the few. So that's the Israelites and Pharaoh, okay? That's the Rebel Alliance and the Death Star, all right? And once you start seeing it, you see it everywhere. This is the last picture I'll show you. That was the same summer in Seattle. And that 40-story monolith with the yellow legs belonged to Shell Oil. It's a mobile drilling rig, and they wanted to send it up in the Arctic to open up the Arctic for oil drilling. Think about that for a minute. Scientists had carefully explained that if we kept burning oil all the time, we would melt the Arctic. Then we melted the Arctic. Did Shell Oil look at that and think, maybe we should go into a different business like solar panels or something? No. Shell Oil looked at that and said, now that the Arctic's melted, it'll be easier to drill for more oil up there. Let's go. Now that, if you ask me, that starts to call into question whether the big brain was a good adaptation or not, you know. But happily, there were lots of people with perfectly good brains attached to large hearts, which is probably more important, who decided to get in the way. And there they assembled in their small craft of all kinds. We, of course, called them kayaktivists. And for a week, they got in the way, and eventually the Coast Guard cleared a channel and got the drilling rig out, but by then Shell was done. They threw in the towel, having spent $9 billion on this. They said, more or less, they didn't say it publicly, but they said behind the scenes, we cannot take the brand damage of this anymore. This David and Goliath image isn't, we spend a lot of money to try and make people like Shell Oil, and now they're not liking Shell Oil, so we're done. And that was a great win, and we need a lot more like them. Now, I'm going to end here not, if I was a really good organizer, I'd end on some kind of, just end right there on a kind of good rallying note. But before I'm an organizer, I'm a writer, which means I'm more or less obligated to tell you the truth. And the truth is, we don't know if we're going to win. Even if we do everything right now, we don't know if we're going to win. This is the first timed test that human beings have ever faced. Most of our issues are not timed in that way, you know? If we really screw up healthcare, which we seem to be doing right at the moment, that's horrible. It means lots of people die or go bankrupt or can't afford their medicine or take half a dose of insulin when they should take a full one or whatever it is, and that's terrible. There's no reason for it, but it doesn't mean that when we come to our senses, we won't be able to solve it, you know? Eventually we will. Like every other country in the world, we'll learn how to, provide medical care to people who need it. This one's not like that. If we don't solve it soon, then we never solve it because we go past a series of tipping points, some of which we've already gone past. Nobody has a plan for refreezing the Arctic now that it's melted, okay? That's why it's so urgent to go to work now, and it's why, as I say, we don't know if we can pull off even the task of slowing things down enough to let civilizations endure. It's an open question. The best science indicates that if we do everything right from this point on, we may be able to, but it's clearly a narrow window closing fast. So I can't guarantee you that we will win the fight, But I can guarantee you, and couldn't have said this 10 years ago, I can guarantee you, and you've seen the pictures to prove it, I can guarantee you that at least there is going to be a fight. And that's a good thing. And it's a pleasure to be in a room with people like the people from the Land Trust and the Garden Club and every place else who are part of that fight and who I think will understand the need to do more than we've done in the past. And it's good to be in a room, in a place with a lot of leverage. This is not like Haiti. If this part of Connecticut made up its mind, it's a place that can exert tremendous power on the Chases of the world and the city banks and the insurance companies and everybody else. You got a lot of leverage, and leverage is important because time is short. So all I can say is it's always an honor to be in rooms full of people like this who are engaged in the fight and just get to say, I look forward to fighting with you shoulder to shoulder going forward. Thank you very much. It's good. It's good. So now I completely understand if you need to leave, but we've got time to ask. I rambled on a while, but we've got time for some questions anyway, and comments and abuse. I mean, I gave it to you perfectly hard. Feel free to give it right back just as hard. Raise your hand, and we'll try to. I can sort of see what's going on out here. Looks like there's a question over here. And one. Okay, let's start right over there because you got a microphone.
Yeah,
Good.
I have a question. It's winter time in Connecticut, and I'm not a big air conditioning fan, but I get really, really cold, and there are a lot of trees, and I don't know if solar panels are gonna work on my house, and because I live in New Canaan, they're gonna overcharge me to put them on. Any suggestions on how to do the individual fight?
Sure. I mean, so if you can't put solar panels on your roof, then there are, easy ways now to join up with community solar and to, get some renewable energy. We have one of the best pieces of new technology in recent years to replace your gas-fired or oil-fired furnace is this air source heat pump technology that's come along in the last little while. That uses the heat, the latent heat in the air outside to produce, with some electricity, the heat for your house. Basically, we have to electrify everything we can electrify because we can produce, at least theoretically, we can produce electricity cleanly in ways we can't ever burn coal or gas or oil. So get to work with your contractor and things. But then, as I said, don't spend a huge amount of time on it. Spend some, but we need your time and energy devoted to the deeper task of changing the ground rules here so that people don't have to work so hard to make these choices. In a rational world, we would quickly have organized at a federal and at a state level to make it extremely easy to do what you want and need to do. And it shouldn't be a problem because when you make these kind of changes, heat pumps, solar panels, insulation, there's a capital cost up front to do it, but you instantly get big savings in the amount of energy that you're using. And so we should be able to finance without too much trouble working together this conversion of house by house into efficient users of energy because there's an obvious and easily calculable savings stream that comes from doing that kind of work. So do some work at home, change your light bulb, but change your Senate too,
Bill, hi, Mark Taba. Very grateful to have you here. Proud Middlebury alum, proud New Canaan resident of 28 years. So thank you again for coming. Maybe we might have you a little longer, actually, because I understand it's supposed to snow, a foot of snow in Middlebury tomorrow. So if you need a place to stay, I think you have quite a few homes here to choose from. back in June, when during our alumni weekend, you said something very pertinent, I thought, to me. Part of the problem I think we have is this terrible discourse between the believers and the non-believers. I think, you know, one of the struggles that people have is not to make their friends enemies and wanting to keep a social discourse going, yet believing in their true, you know, climate beliefs.
Yeah.
One of the things you said was, don't worry about those who don't believe.
Yeah.
Worry about the ones who do.
I think that's...
And make that bigger.
I think that that's the good answer, and I think actually it's the right question to ask 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, okay? Not worth worrying, not worth destroying dinner, arguing with your crazy uncle who's spent the last 20 years listening to Rush Limbaugh. Of course he has no idea about what's going on, you know, and he's not going to, so it's not worth the effort. The key is that 70% of Americans now do know what's going on. We just need to activate some decent percentage of them into actually fighting hard on this. And it doesn't even need to be everyone, you know. History indicates you can get 5, 6, 7% of people involved in a fight, you usually win. And the reason is that apathy cuts both ways. We worked hard to get 7 million people out in the street in September. We worked hard to make sure there were enough portable toilets and enough microphones and enough police barricade, you know, all the things you need. The one thing we didn't worry about was that the next day there'd be 7 million people out in the street demanding more climate change, you know. Apathy cuts both ways. So if we build a movement, we can win, but it takes building that movement. So forget about your crazy uncle, concentrate on your sweet aunt, you know, and explain to her why she needs to be, you know, occupying her local Chase branch next April, you know, in a teach-in. So, you know, there you are.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. So I'm on the alumni council of a fellow rival NESCAC school, and our students and some of our alumni have been trying to push the divestment. And we're not getting anywhere because the trustees' response is, well, if we do that, we're going to have to stop need-blind admission, and that's going to really negatively impact low-income and minority students who won't get free rides anymore, and scholarships and things like that. So I'm interested, has Middlebury divested?
Yes, Middlebury has divested.
What recommendations do you have? Because I'm sure there are a lot of other people in the room who
Yes,
are involved
absolutely.
in their institutions as well.
Absolutely. It's a very good question. I'm glad you asked it. So look, when we began mostly saying this is a moral question, you need to do this because it's not okay to try to profit off the wreckage of the planet. Which there were a certain number of people who were willing to divest, you know, religious denominations and so on. But it quickly has become clear that it's also by far the best business decision you can make, and that's why places like Middlebury or the University of California or half the educational institutions in the UK or Smith last week or, you know, on and on and on have decided to divest. The drag on returns from investing in an outdated, antiquated technology is large. Someone just did a study for the pension fund in New York State. If the pension fund in New York State had divested from fossil fuel when we asked them to 7 or 8 years ago, they would have, on average, $19,000 more per pensioner in New York State. Colorado and California together have managed to lose $19 billion by not divesting over the last 5 years. Those numbers start to add up, you know. It takes a little work for institutions to divest because they can't just, you know, they have to give their fund managers a little more guidance, but now this is possible. I mean, Middlebury just divested, and the company Investure that handles its funds and the funds for a few dozen other colleges around the country bit the bullet and set up an entire fossil-free investment sort of program, and it, what do you know, it's made much more money than the conventional model. So I think it's at this point okay to tell them it's not going to cost you money, and you should do it, and you've got to stop worrying about, you know, Reginald Bearer Bonds the seventh, you know, who might get annoyed at you divesting and leave 2 fewer squash courts, you know, in his will, because you've got a more difficult problem. You've got every smart high school kid in America now cares deeply about climate change. Every last one. I mean, I speak a lot at high schools, and you do not find, there's not, I mean, that's the thing they care about, and they're not going to want to be at your school if your school's a complicit part of destroying the planet. I mean, they're just not having it anymore. And I mean, go look at a tape of Greta Thunberg sometime. She's not having it, you know? It's not fooling around, and her attitude is the same attitude as an awful lot of other young people, thank heaven. So, good for you. Thank you for keeping up the fight.
Hi, thanks for coming out. So, you mentioned Thanksgiving, and I think, you know, obviously the arguments and everything are saddling up with more sympathetic people. The day in November, which seems to be a holiday at this point, that I find more concerning is Black Friday. And you know, my question really is, I mean, for those of us who don't have portfolios to divest, and probably those of us who do, I mean, I think this can go for hedge fund people as well as the people who were born during the Clinton administration or the Bush administration in the room and elsewhere. I think one thing tangibly that anybody can really do is consider buying less stuff.
Completely. It's very, I in fact wrote a book once called $100 Holiday about transforming the way one celebrates Christmas. And I can tell you that it actually makes Christmas a sweeter time in a lot of ways if you have to think a little more creatively. But this goes back to what I said before. It is important to consume less, and we're not going to solve this problem that way. You cannot make the math work in the time we have. There's a whole set of solutions that make complete sense if you have 50 years or 75 years, but we don't. We've got 10 years. And so our hope lies in changing the underlying ground rules. That does not mean that you shouldn't consume less. You should. You should eat lower on the food chain. It's important. You should think of all the things you can do to help, but save as much energy as you can for the work of changing not yourself, but the larger system. Because just do the math. So think about food. There's 0.5% of Americans who are vegans now, okay? And if we, worked super hard over 10 years, I bet we could build a movement that could change that by an order of magnitude, and we'd have 5% of Americans being vegans. That'd take a lot of work, but it'd be good, because each one of them would, we think about 18% of carbon emissions come from animal agriculture, so 5% of people would be emitting 18% less carbon. That's really good, but it actually doesn't change the trajectory that we're on. If we can get 5% of people who will really put pressure on the system, then we have a chance of doing fundamental things. Massive subsidies for renewable energy, a price on carbon that makes sure every decision we make takes this into account, a policy of what we've been calling keep it in the ground policies that prevent new mining and drilling, first on public land, but then on as much land as we possibly can. The kind of things that actually can deflect this trajectory. One of the reasons I think it's so important to be targeting not just the political system, but the financial system, is because the other thing you have to remember about all this is, if we can't make this happen globally, then it's not going to work either. We have to not just make America in 10 years a different place, we have to make the whole world a different place. That's a very hard battle to do, one consumer at a time, and even one political system at a time. One of the values of going after the financial system is If you get Chase and Citi behaving differently, and hence, I mean, the financial industry is, as many of you know, sort of sheep-like in its behavior, much of the rest of the financial community behaving differently, that strikes quick change globally in ways that might really matter. So that's why I spend more of my time on that, even though, as I say, the sort of stuff that's closest to my heart is precisely what you're describing. And you can, I bet, you don't want to buy it for obvious reasons, but you can go to the beautiful new Canaan library when it's done and get a copy of $100 Holiday. I bet they have one.
Thanks a lot.
Hi, I understand
Where are you?
there was a president that put a solar panel on the White House. Here.
Oh, there you
that-
are.
who put-
Yes, yes.
Yes, and then the president after him took it off. So, and if anybody doesn't know, it was Jimmy Carter, and then Reagan took it off.
Yes.
A lot of people don't know that. So, but my question is, why aren't more federal buildings, or maybe, the question's already answered, but
Yes.
why don't we see more federal buildings with solar panels?
Yes.
And more federal vehicles alternative? I'd like to see the next president
Yes.
driving in a Prius.
Yes.
Do you think
So,
that could happen?
First, let me tell you the story about those solar panels, because it's a good one. Jimmy Carter did indeed put solar panels on the roof. As with many things, Mr. Carter was ahead of his time. I got to say, the longer the man lives, the better he looks. And those pictures of him last week, bandaged up from falling and yet nonetheless out there building Habitat for Humanity houses, was one of the more moving things one's ever seen. It's literally impossible to imagine a deeper contrast than with the current occupant of his old house. Ronald Reagan took down those solar panels because he was a creature of the fossil fuel industry. I went and found the solar panels about 10 years ago. They were when Ronald Reagan had taken them down, a professor from a tiny college in Maine, a place called Unity College in central Maine, had gone and gotten them. I mean, they just tossed them in the dumpster, essentially, and he took them. And they had been on the roof of the cafeteria of this college in Maine for ever since. And so I went and borrowed 3 of them gave me 3 of them. We put them on a trailer and took them to Washington, stopping along the way in cities and holding these big rallies. And we got to the White House and gave them to Barack Obama's people to put back on, which was good when they did that eventually. They didn't do enough. They did more than others, but it was not a priority of that administration, any of this work. It needs to be a priority of the next administration. The very good news is that the politics around this are shifting pretty rapidly. In the Democratic Party, the #1 issue for voters is climate change now, which is a big change. You'll remember that we never had even a single debate question about climate change ever until this year. But this year we've had an entire debate just devoted to it, which is good. And the really good thing is, with that kind of demand comes supply. That's how markets work. All the candidates have come up with really pretty good climate plans. As usual, Bernie's is the single most aggressive and deepest. As usual, Senator Warren has actually done a lot of the homework to, make it real, and her plan is very good and strong. And one of the things that both of them include is a real commitment to using federal buying power to make sure that this happens. At this point, I mean, it's crazy that any federal government or state government or city government would buy cars that aren't electric. That's just the kind of modeling that we need to do, and they're not more expensive now, so we should be doing it, and putting, the federal government's not doing this. Cities are beginning to. Some are beginning. So California now makes new construction put solar panels on the roof. A couple of cities in California within the last few months have outlawed for new construction hookups to gas lines. So instead of having gas burners, you have to use induction cooktops, in order to cook, which is fine. They work great and they use almost no energy. On and on and on. So you're thinking along just the right lines. we have time for one more here? I don't mean to keep you all, and I can tell when to go. Let's do one more.
Hi, Bill. What are 3 or 4 things that those of us in this room can do this year?
So this year, you can work hard on whatever pot of money you're connected to get it to divest from fossil fuel. You can work hard to start making sure that as we head into this next election, you're backing people who are working hard on this stuff and that they know why you're backing them and what's important to you. And you can start doing the kind of organizing by joining the local chapter of 350 or the Sierra Club or whoever else, or if they're willing to sort of do it, the Garden Club or whatever, who's going to be ready to take on these questions around the financial industry next spring when they really come to a head. I would say for this part of the world, that's the single most important thing that one could be thinking about. We're going to be talking about banks, and we're going to be talking about Connecticut's, native industry, insurance. Insurance is one of the most interesting industries in the world. I mean, that's the part of those are the people in our economic system that we ask to understand risk for us. And they've done a pretty good job. They have all the data to demonstrate what the problem is, and you can tell they have it because now they're telling people in California they can't have insurance anymore for their houses, because they're going to burn down. Okay, that's, we got to figure out a way around that. But these same insurance companies still, there've been big actions about Liberty Mutual and a bunch of others in the last few weeks. If you're a oil company and you're going to build a new pipeline, you've got to get insurance before you can do it. You can't even go survey the pipeline until someone's written an insurance policy. What if the surveyor falls and breaks his leg, And these same companies that understand exactly what's happening are willing for a price to keep underwriting precisely the activities in the same way that Chase, which understands everything there is to understand about, that's not like no one's told them about climate change. They know what's going on. We can make a short-term profit by doing this. And so we've got to figure out the ways to pressure and shame them out of that. And since Connecticut is as close to the heart of the financial services industry as any place on planet Earth, I hope some of you take that as your particular mission to try and figure out. You'll have a better idea than anybody about how to go about it because you understand more, who it is and how they work and how they think than I do. All I'm telling you is we cannot just keep doing the same things we've been doing because doing the same things we've been doing so far has melted the Arctic ice cap. That's a bad sign, okay? We've only got so many big physical features on the planet. There was a study out last week that said it had gotten hot enough that the Amazon rainforest, even without people cutting it down, has begun to dry out to the point where forests are dying and it's going to start turning into savanna. If we lose the Amazon, then we can't make any of this math work, So people have got to make some changes, and that's just where we are. As I said at the beginning, my job is to bum you out. I apologize for it, and I thank you enormously for your forbearance through it all.
Thank you to Bill, and thank you to all of you for attending this evening. Drive safely.